There was a man called Larry, or I'm going to call him Larry anyway because I just made him up. And he had a birthday one year and he received many beautiful gifts from friends and cards and all these things, but there was one card that didn't have a name on it. It was anonymous. Didn't know who it came from, didn't know how it got into his hands, but inside was a gift card or a credit card sort of thing, and it just said one word on it: unlimited. It's like, that's a bit strange. So then he tried it out, and it was, in fact, unlimited. It was a bottomless credit card. He could just spend anything he wanted, as much as he wanted, on anything that he could. He had free money, an endless source of money to just spend on everything. So he was pretty happy. He sorted himself out and got lots of things, sorted out a few problems in his life, and got himself comfortable, but he was also kind and generous to others, so he helped out a lot of family and friends. He kept it a little bit quiet because he didn't want the whole world rushing to him or trying to steal it. But he helped out lots of people, helped with what they needed, bought them all sorts of things. But even though he could see that it was making a beautiful contribution in other people's lives, that they were grateful, that people were really being helped by what he was doing, he didn't feel like he was being generous. There was this kind of niggling sense within his heart that it's like, I don't feel like I'm giving anything. It actually almost feels like I'm being stingy. Because I can buy people whatever I want. I can kind of help them with as much money as I can, but I'm not really giving anything from myself. It doesn't reduce my bank account at all. It doesn't actually take anything from me to give. So there was another friend that he had who needed a bit of help, was in a bit of a rough spot, and he wanted to help him out, but he decided that instead of just buying him stuff with his card like he'd done for so many other people, he decided he would give him the card. So he gave away his free money. He gave away his unlimited resources. And this guy was able to help himself out and sort it out. But Larry, he did feel a bit sad because, okay, now he has to go back to just getting by and managing his funds and that sort of thing. But he also felt this deep peace that he'd actually given something that meant something. He'd given something that cost him something because he'd given up this infinite resource that he had. If anybody knows a Larry or knows anybody, or if you yourself have an unlimited credit card, then just talk to me after Mass. That'd be really great. I could use your help. But this story, I think, points to something of what generosity really looks like within our hearts, that it's not always just about how much we can give or how much we can help others, but we ought to, and we're made to actually give something that costs something to us, actually make a real sacrifice. And when I think about God as well, and these readings that we've just heard show that God makes a sacrifice for us. But if there was anything that we could say, it's hard for God to do that, I think we could say that it's hard for God to do something, to give us something that actually costs him, that actually would hurt him, or that he would actually be deprived by giving us something. Because God's just infinite and has all the resources of the universe at his disposal. So what could God actually do to actually cost something himself? But this is what our readings say. That God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Might seem like God can't give us anything that would cost him something, but his own son. In the second reading, Paul states that although Jesus his state was divine. He was with the Father in heaven, again, just perfectly complete in his godness and perfectly secure in heaven, but he came down out of heaven. He let go of that so as to be with us. He let go of the security of heaven so as to walk around like us and be weak and tired and hungry, and he would have sore feet after having to walk somewhere. He grieved the loss of his friends, and he gave himself out. He let go of that security of heaven so much that he even went to death and died for us. Because God wasn't satisfied with just kind of giving us things, but he wanted to actually give us himself. He wanted to make a sacrifice that cost him something. This is the love in the heart of God. And when God in Jesus, he pours himself out in that way. When he lays down his life for us, even though Jesus goes to death, what was the result of it? The fruit of his sacrifice was life. We see that pouring out of his life was the path to the fullness of life, to the resurrection. This is what the grace of friendship with Christ offers us, that he wants us to love with that same sort of generosity and selflessness, that we would actually want to give of ourselves, give something that means something to us. And when we do, because in Christ we have the grace to be able to actually lay down our lives for one another or make a true sacrifice, we find that that's the path of life. We find that it bears the fruit of resurrection life amongst us. This is the grace that's at work in our lives. This is what Jesus calls us to as disciples. He wants to see this love at work in our hearts. This is the grace and the story that he wants to unfold throughout our lives, and this is what he's given us to steward in our lives. Now, I began reflecting on the grace of stewardship last week, what stewardship is and what it is that we've been entrusted with. So stewardship is that we've been given something that's not ours, and we have to care for it. We have to manage it responsibly. But what has been given to us is a very important question. But we see that there's a grace at work in our lives. There's a power and a story that's unfolding through the years of our life that God wants to bring forth a love that's supernatural, that's incredible. He wants to bring forth a supernatural fruitfulness in our lives, in our love for one another, in our service in the church. He wants us as a community as well to grow in his grace in a supernatural way, to have a supernatural fruitfulness in our connection, in our welcome, in our worship, in our individual growth as disciples, but together. This is the incredible grace that Jesus gives to us and invites us to steward it. And I was reflecting last week that if we recognize the incredible nature of this grace that we're entrusted with, we recognize that that's something that we could never bring about by our own strength, then, as Jesus taught us in the gospel last week, the only way that we could possibly bring that about is by giving ourselves completely to him, by placing our whole lives into Jesus' hands, because there's a power at work in our lives that we can't bring about that result ourselves, but we open up to God by that surrender. And what that surrender looks like is a balance of this tension between uncertainty and trust. Because we recognize that we're not in control, that we can't bring it about ourselves. And there's uncertainty and fear and worry perhaps in that, but then we also trust that, okay, no, God is bringing it about and he's bringing all things to good and he's got me firmly in his hands. It's a bit like Peter walking out on the water with Jesus, this balance between uncertainty and trust. And so being Jesus' disciple means kind of stepping out of our comfort zone, out of our comfortable place to where Jesus is calling us to trust in him. So if we are to steward well the grace that God's given us, and this is what our stewardship campaign is about, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about our finances. Because while the stewardship campaign is, I think, most importantly about God's heart, and it's about the mission of what he's working in our midst, it's also about finances too. So here in the parish at St. Ben's, with the number of people we've got attending Mass, and I see a packed church today, people standing at the back, with the amount of income that we have coming in, we could be very comfortable. We could keep the parish ticking along at a nice, consistent level if we were content to do that. But what I'm seeing, what we are seeing in the community is growth. We're seeing more people coming. We're seeing people's lives being transformed. We're seeing people hungry to grow as disciples, to get to know Jesus more, to live out the mission more and more in their own lives. And rather than just keeping the parish running at a nice, consistent level, what I want to see is that we can keep that growth going, that we can steward that growth, that we can steward the work that God is doing amongst us and expand the mission, to press forward with what God is doing. And while today I am inviting you to consider giving more, I also want to say that whether you give more or not, whatever resources we have coming in, whether that increases or decreases, we're going to keep pressing forward with the mission whatever way we can, with whatever we have, whatever resources God puts into our hands. Because this is what God's entrusted us with. And because I'm willing, and we're willing as a parish team, to brave that tension between uncertainty and trust, and to step out and follow Jesus on the mission of what he's doing here in the parish. Because this is why the church exists, not to be comfortable, not to just stay the same, but for mission. Now, to get a bit more specific, what do our finances actually look like? To give a rough picture of what we've got coming in and coming out, our collections from weekend masses roughly add up to about $8 per person per week of the numbers that we have coming to Mass. And if we were to compare that to our ministry expenses, which is also an oversimplification because the finances are a bit more complex than that, we could say that the ministry expenses are at about $13 per person per week. Now, if you hear those two numbers and do a little bit of maths, you can see that there's a gap there. There's a $5 gap. And this is the space that we're inviting you to step into. This is the gap that we're inviting you to step into. What is that gap, though? One of the big reasons for that gap at the moment is that for the last 5 years, we've been renting out the primary school, which closed down at the end of 2020, to Emmaus College. And they've been paying us rent for that. And that income has been a huge boost to the parish. If you've been around for the last 5 years, you've seen the way the community has grown, the way that we've been able to expand our tent, expand our mission, offer more things. So that's been an amazing benefit. But as of the end of this year, Emmaus won't be renting the primary school anymore, so we're not going to have that income. And we will have an empty primary school, and we are considering the options and the different ways that we might be able to leverage income from that in a different way. So we're discerning that. But this is also an opportunity for us, for you, to take up the mission that Jesus has entrusted us with and to step into that gap so that we can own this mission ourselves, so that we can steward what God is doing in our midst. And that's the practical invitation I want to make to you today. And so I just wanted to explain that with the stewardship program, we're inviting you to make a pledge. So you'll see these pledge cards in the pews. You can do it online if you're watching online. But we invite you to pledge that I'm going to give a consistent amount each week. Now, you might already be on the stewardship program, so it may be a matter of, I want to stay the same, I want to increase, I want to decrease. That's cool too. Or you may want to sign up to give in a new way. This allows us to actually know what's coming in, to be able to budget, to plan, to look forward and to prepare for what ministries we're doing. Another aspect of that is that if you get onto automatic giving, it helps us a lot because it just cuts out so much administration. It's easier for us, it's easier for you. You can also do that by the link and on the website. But we're not having this campaign because we're running out of money, because we're worried about that, but it's about an invitation. And it's about the desire in our hearts to go with what God's doing, because we're seeing a vision of a parish that's expanding, an inspiring vision of what God's doing in individual people's lives, in our groups, in our ministries, in many events, and that excites me. I hope that excites you. And I say again that we want to press forward with that mission with whatever we've got, whatever resources we have. So I don't want us to build up our giving culture just because we feel like it's a good Christian thing to do, and I need to kind of tick that box off or I'll feel guilty. I don't want us to look at giving in a simply transactional way of, okay, this is what I'm getting out of the parish, as if it was like a gym membership, an equitable business relationship where I'm paying for what I'm getting. That's not the kind of organization we are here as a church. What I want is that Jesus would move in your hearts, that you would open up your hearts to the love of Jesus, that he would give you a passion for this mission, that he would inspire you with a desire to see this goodness, this richness that we celebrate here, that we share together, that everybody on earth, that every person would be able to encounter that goodness of God. We see the generosity with which Jesus lays down his life on the cross for us, and he wants to inspire us with that same sort of love. He wants to inspire us to take up that mission along with him and to give our time and our energies, and yes, to give our money too, so that we can participate in what he's doing, so that we can co-create with Jesus, so that we can steward the flourishing that he's bringing about in our midst. Before we think about how much I'm going to give, my greatest invitation I want to make to you is to open up to that generosity in the heart of God, so that he can set you on fire for this mission and this vision that he's got for our beautiful community here. So that just as he gave his life for us with total generosity, that we can receive that grace in our hearts, that we can be impacted by Jesus laying down his life on the cross for us, that we can learn with that same generosity to place ourselves completely in the hands of Jesus.